The history of the 15th century is forged from despair, faith, and iron. At the center of this cauldron, where the fate of France was being remelted, stands a figure still known today as the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc. Her appearance in 1429 was like a miracle. She arrived when France had practically ceased to exist, divided between the English king and the Duke of Burgundy, and its own Dauphin, Charles VII, was hiding behind the Loire, lacking both will and army. In just a few months, this young peasant girl lifted the siege of Orleans, defeated the English at Patay, and led her king to his coronation in Reims, legitimizing his power. But her triumph was short-lived. In May 1430, while attempting to hold Compiègne, she was captured by the Burgundians. The English allies immediately sold her to their masters. Charles VII, to whom she had given the crown, did nothing to save her. A year later in Rouen, she was condemned and burned at the stake. Her death seemed to change nothing. The war dragged on for another 22 years, devastating the country. We perceive this ending as a tragic but inevitable point in her biography. But what if this detail, this one event at the walls of Compiègne, had turned out differently? What if Joan had survived and, using her authority, had gained real political power instead of a martyr's crown? Watch the video to the end to find out how history might have changed if Joan of Arc had survived and become Regent of France. To understand the scale of the possible change, we must first assess the depth of the abyss in which France found itself in 1429. It was not a state, but a conglomerate of warring territories. After the catastrophic defeat at Agincourt in 1415 and the death of the Mad King Charles VII, the country split apart. Under the Treaty of Troyes, the English King Henry V and later his young son Henry VI was proclaimed King of France. The English and their allies, the powerful Dukes of Burgundy, controlled Paris, all of northern France, and the rich Aquitaine region in the southwest. The heir to the French throne, the Dauphin Charles, controlled only the land south of the Loire River. He was disparagingly called the King of Bourges after the city where he kept his modest court. His legitimacy was in question. Even his own mother, Isabella of Bavaria, had signed a treaty depriving him of his inheritance. The state was bankrupt. The treasury was empty, taxes were not being collected, and what little was collected was immediately plundered by court cliques and favorites, such as Georges de la Trémoille. The army, if it could be called that, was a pitiful sight. It was not a unified force, but a collection of feudal militias, and worse still, bands of mercenaries known as écorcheurs, flayers. These soldiers of fortune, left without work, plundered and ravaged the very French land they were supposed to defend. There was no discipline. Logistics and supplies depended solely on plundering the local population. The French knighthood, once the pride of Europe, had completely lost its fighting spirit after Agincourt. Against this backdrop, Joan's appearance was not just a military event, but a psychological turning point. She brought something that none of the generals had: absolute confidence in victory and divine legitimacy. She was not just a commander, she was a symbol that God was still on France's side. She was able to get old, cynical military leaders such as Dunois and Laguerre to obey her and act in concert. It was this intangible power that enabled her to lift the siege of Orleans. But this same power made her incredibly dangerous to the established order. The aristocracy and courtiers of Charles VII viewed her with suspicion. She was a nobody, she did not belong to any clan, and her authority was not based on nobility or wealth. She was loyal only to France and her king, which made her uncontrollable. As soon as Charles received the crown in Reims, Joan's main goal was achieved. For the king and his advisors, she became a burden, a living reproach for their own indecision, and possibly a source of future problems. Subscribe so you don't miss other alternative versions of history. Let's imagine for a moment that the events of May 23, 1430, at the walls of Compiègne had turned out differently. In our story, Joan led a desperate sortie against the Burgundian camp. The attack was bold but poorly coordinated. The Burgundians counterattacked, and the English detachment cut off her retreat. The commander of the city, fearing an enemy breakthrough, ordered the bridge to be raised. Joan remained outside and was captured. But what if this tactical maneuver had been successful? Let's say Joan's sortie had been more successful. Her soldiers, inspired by the presence of the Virgin, not only repelled the Burgundians, but also inflicted significant damage on them, capturing a key fortification. Joan returns to the city in triumph. This victory, albeit local, once again raises her authority to unattainable heights. Rumors of her failure near Paris are forgotten. She is once again a symbol of victory. Seeing the futility of the siege, the Burgundians and English are forced to retreat from Compiègne. Joan returns to the court of Charles VII, not as a supplicant, but as a victor. Now let us introduce the second, more tragic, but logically necessary factor for her rise. In the winter of 1431, King Charles VII, who had never been in good health and was prone to melancholy, fell seriously ill. It was probably pneumonia, or fever, as it was called at the time. In our story, he will live for a long time, but in this scenario, the illness proves fatal. Charles VII dies. France, which had just found hope, is once again plunged into chaos. His heir, the Dauphin Louis, the future Louis XI, is only 8 years old in 1431. He is a child. By law, the kingdom needs a regent, and immediately the court explodes with intrigue. Old factions, such as the one led by Georges de la Trémoille, and relatives of the king, such as the Duke of Anjou, immediately began fighting for the right to guardianship of the young king, which essentially meant fighting for power over France. The country, still reeling from one civil war, the Armagnacs against the Burgundians, was on the brink of another. At this critical moment, the military entered the scene. Jeanne's captains, Dunois, Laguerre, Poton de Centraille, were battle-hardened veterans whose loyalty belonged not to the schemers at court, but to the one who had led them to victory. They understand perfectly well that if the aristocrats start a new civil war, England will return and destroy France. They see only one figure capable of keeping the country from falling apart: Joan of Arc. She enjoys the unlimited support of the army and, more importantly, of the common people who see her as a saint. The military, relying on the Paris garrison and loyal units, carry out what can be called a bloodless coup. They appear at a meeting of the Royal Council and demand that Joan of Arc be appointed regent, defender of the kingdom, until Louis the Refund comes of age. The aristocrats have no choice. Any attempt to object would mean a mutiny by the army. Joan probably does not seek this power, but her voices tell her to save France. She takes on the burden of regency in the name of her new, young king. Having gained supreme power, Joan the Regent faces a task that seems impossible. The English still control Normandy and Paris, but Joan, for all her religiosity, has a clear strategic mind. She understands that the root of the problem is not so much the English as the division within France itself. England is strong only because it is aided by the richest and most powerful state in the region, Burgundy. As long as Duke Philip the Good fights on the side of the English, victory is impossible. In our story, Charles VII and Philip signed the Treaty of Arras in 1435. It was a long and humiliating process for Charles, which he only began after Joan was dead. But Joan acts immediately. Her first and foremost diplomatic mission is to reconcile with Burgundy. This seems crazy. It was the Burgundians who captured her, and they were the ones responsible for the Civil War. But Joan looks not to the past, but to the future. She, the defender of France, personally travels to the border of the Burgundian possessions, to Dijon or Arras, to meet with Philip the Good. This is an unprecedented step. Duke Philip is a complex figure. He is a pragmatist and an art lover, but he also remembers that Charles VII's father was involved in the murder of his own father, John the Fearless. He despises the King of Bourges, But Joan is not Charles. She is a phenomenon he cannot ignore. The meeting between Joan and Philip becomes a turning point. She addresses him not as a politician, but as a prophetess. She does not bargain, but calls. She does not speak of feudal rights, but of a united Christian France bleeding to death. She appeals to his piety and his pride. She offers him not just peace, but glory, to become the second man in the kingdom, the unifier of the country, not a vassal of the English king. And she offers him what Charles could not offer, immediate military support against anyone who challenges his power. Philip the Good, being a shrewd politician, sees which way the wind is blowing. The English are weak. Their successes depend solely on French disunity. Joan offers him everything: forgiveness for the past, guarantees of his possessions, including the richest Flanders and Brabant, and a leading role in a new, united France. He agrees. In this reality, the Treaty of Arras is signed in 1431, 4 years earlier. But this is not the treaty that was in our history. It is not just Burgundy's withdrawal from the war. It is a complete military and political alliance. The armies of France and Burgundy unite. The English, who until then had been the masters of the North, suddenly find themselves squeezed between two powerful allies. The civil war in France, which had lasted for decades, ends with a single diplomatic stroke, backed by the authority of Joan. This section, devoted to military and administrative reforms, is presented in a calm, analytical tone. By uniting with Burgundy, Joan the Regent gains not only political, but also economic resources at her disposal. Flanders, part of the Burgundian lands, is the center of European trade and textile production. This gives the Regency access to credit and financial flows that Charles VII could not even dream of. However, Joan understands that the old feudal system of warfare is unsuitable for defeating England, and more importantly, for establishing order within the country. Joan's experience at Orléans and Patay taught her two things. First, feudal knights are undisciplined and often useless against a coordinated defense. Second, the artillery she used so actively is the key to future victories. She needed an army that would obey not local barons, but the crown directly. She needed an army that would fight for pay, not for the right to plunder. Relying on her unquestionable authority and using Burgundian financial leverage, Joan and her advisors, such as the pragmatic Dunois, initiated a reform that would not occur in our history until 1445. This was the creation of the Ordonnance Companies, Compagnie d'Ordonnance. This was, in essence, the first professional, standing army in Europe since the days of Rome. Each company had a clear structure, a unified command, and most importantly, received regular pay from the royal treasury. This immediately solved the second problem: the mercenaries. Bands of mercenaries were given a choice: either join the new ordnance companies and submit to royal discipline, or be destroyed. Many chose to serve. Those who refused were methodically tracked down and exterminated by the new army. For the first time in a generation, relative order reigned on the roads of France. At the same time, a militia of Franks archers, free archers, was created. A reserve recruited not from the nobility, but from wealthy peasants and townspeople, which further reduced the crown's dependence on the feudal lords. Of course, such an army requires enormous resources. The old system of feudal levies cannot provide them. Joan, acting as regent on behalf of the young king, takes a revolutionary step. She makes temporary military taxes permanent, primarily the taille, a direct tax on land and property. In our history, Charles VII did this only in 1439, when his power was consolidated. Jeanne did it in 1432. This move caused a murmur of discontent among the aristocracy, who lost their main right, the right to wage war, and were also taxed, but they could not protest openly. Firstly, Joan enjoys the support of the Third Estate, townspeople and peasants, who prefer to pay a single, understandable tax to the king rather than be subjected to endless levies by feudal lords and looting by mercenaries. Second, it is useless to rebel against the regent, who is adored by her own professional army. Thus, in just a few years of regency, Joan lays the two pillars of French absolutism, a standing army and a permanent direct tax. With the combined Franco-Burgundian forces, stable funding, and the core of a new professional army at her disposal, Joan the Regent embarks on the final stage of her mission. The war with England transforms from a chaotic feudal feud into a methodical, systematic campaign to liberate the territory. The English, still confident in their superiority, do not immediately realize that the rules of the game have changed. Paris becomes the first and main target. In our history, Joan suffered defeat there, but now she approaches the capital not with a handful of volunteers, but at the head of a huge, well-supplied army. She is supported by the Burgundian contingent, which knows the city and has its supporters there. The siege of Paris in 1432 is short-lived. The townspeople, seeing the power of the united army and tired of the English occupation, open the gates themselves. The young King Louis XIII enters his capital on the shoulders of a jubilant crowd, alongside the Regent Joan. Next came the campaign in Normandy. This was no longer a series of minor skirmishes, but a full-scale war involving artillery in which Joan had always been strong. French cannons, cast with new money, methodically reduced the walls of English castles to ruins. The English army, still relying on its archers, suffers one defeat after another. They cannot win in the field, and their fortresses cannot protect them. By 1434, all of Normandy, including Rouen, is liberated. The last stronghold of the English remains Gascony, Aquitaine, in the southwest. This region had been linked to England for centuries, but now it is isolated. The French army, hardened by battles in Normandy, moves south. The final battle, analogous to the Battle of Castillon, takes place not in 1453, but say in 1435. The English army under the command of John Talbot is defeated, and Talbot himself is killed in battle. The 100 Years' War ends 20 years earlier. The victory has not only military but also profound internal consequences. Peace finally comes to the country. Instead of being disbanded, the new professional army becomes the guarantor of royal power. Joan uses it to restore order. The roads are cleared of bandits, and feudal lords who try to wage private wars in the old way are immediately brought to heel. France, devastated by a century of war, begins to recover at an incredible speed. Joan the Regent, having fulfilled her mission, remains in power, raising the young King Louis. She does not seek luxury. Her court at the Louvre is more like a monastery or a military headquarters. She invests all the taxes collected in the restoration of bridges, roads, and cathedrals. Her reign, the Age of Jeanne, becomes a legendary time of order, justice, and piety, a golden age that will be remembered for centuries. Let's compare the known outcome with a possible alternative. In our history, the end of the 100 Years' War took decades and was accompanied by enormous human and economic losses that weakened France for a long time. But in this reality, the victorious and, most importantly, rapid end of the war under the auspices of Joan's regency completely changes the trajectory of development not only of France, but of all of Europe. Instead of long sieges and exhausting campaigns, the country has the opportunity to focus on internal recovery. Victory becomes not just a military success, but the foundation of a new political order. And all this leads to a completely different future. By the 1440s, the young Louis XIII came of age and assumed power at a time when France was on the rise. He inherited a state that was already accustomed to victory and considered itself the new center of European politics. The court and officials, raised in the spirit of Joan's reforms, expected decisiveness and justice from the young king. Louis grew up in an atmosphere of confidence, not fear and constant struggle. He saw around him a stable country that had all the resources to become a dominant power. This beginning of his reign completely changed his character. In our history, he was a spider king, Forced to weave intrigues all his life to break the rebellious, feudal lords and bring together a fragmented country. His harshness was a response to the chaos in which he grew up and the lack of trust within the kingdom. But here Louis does not need cunning traps and secret alliances because there are no hostile barons demanding obedience. His energy is directed not at internal strife, but at creation. He can afford to be a more open and far-sighted ruler. This makes him a completely different figure. In this reality, he is raised by Joan of Arc, who has managed to create a circle of loyal followers around her and form a new morality for royal power. He sees her as a model of a righteous and strong ruler who combines religiosity with political wisdom. Joan instills in him a respect for the common good and a sense of responsibility to the people. She teaches him that power should serve the unity of the country, not personal ambitions. This upbringing leaves a deep mark. Louis perceives power as a mission, not as an eternal struggle. He inherits not a ruined country, but a centralized, wealthy state with the best army in Europe and a stable tax system. Jean's reforms have already streamlined tax collection and made military service more organized. The royal treasury has sufficient funds for the construction of roads, fortifications, and schools. French cities are growing faster because they have long been spared the ravages of war. Louis can embark on new projects without fear of riots or lack of funds. France becomes a model of efficiency. He does not need to fight his nobles because their power has already been broken by Jean's reforms, and this greatly increases the manageability of the state. Old feudal castles are no longer centers of resistance, but become part of the general state system. The nobles understand that their future depends on the crown and support the central authority. Internal stability becomes an extraordinary value that distinguishes France from its neighbors. Louis uses this stability as a tool of external influence. For the first time in centuries, the country can look outward rather than inward. Instead, he directs all of France's power toward foreign policy, transforming it into an aggressively developing power. He builds a network of embassies, strengthens ties with the papacy, and actively interferes in the affairs of his neighbors. France becomes a trendsetter in politics, culture, and the military. Paris' influence spreads throughout the Mediterranean. This activity forces other states to listen to the French position. Louis further strengthens the country's prestige. The French Renaissance began earlier and was supported by enormous state power, which gave it particular momentum. Artists, scientists, and architects received support from the crown, which sought to demonstrate France's superiority. The court became a center of innovation, where new scientific ideas and styles were discussed. French travel to Italy began decades earlier and became a mass phenomenon. The kingdom actively collected manuscripts, invited craftsmen, and financed the construction of libraries. The Renaissance became an instrument of political competition. The Italian Wars, which in our history began in 1494, may begin 30 to 40 years earlier in this world and be much more successful for France. The French army is more experienced and disciplined thanks to Jean's reforms. Louis perfectly understands the value of Italy as an economic and cultural center. France captures key cities faster and holds them more securely. The Italian states are not ready for such early expansion. This gives France a strategic advantage for several generations. The most important issue is Burgundy, which in the 15th century was one of the richest and most influential states in Europe. In our history, Louis the Rewind fought a deadly battle with Philip the Good's son, Charles the Bold, and ultimately dismembered Burgundy after his death. But in this reality, the dynastic ties strengthened by Joan create a completely different political configuration. France and Burgundy cooperate in trade, military construction, and diplomacy. This relationship seems beneficial to both sides. The alliance becomes a powerful political tool. In this world, the Franco-Burgundian alliance, cemented by Joan, is the foundation of the state and deprives Europe of the opportunity to play on the contradictions between the two neighbors. Paris and Dijon act in concert, causing alarm among the German and Italian rulers. Burgundy gains protection from weaker neighbors, while France gains a wealthy ally with access to trade routes. The alliance acts as a single bloc in international negotiations. Such power makes any resistance almost futile. Europe is changing under the pressure of two centers of power. Charles the Bold, seeing the strength of France, does not dare to engage in open conflict, realizing that this will only lead to the destruction of his possessions. He retains his ambitions but acts more cautiously, taking Louis's will into account. His policy becomes less risky, and he prefers to strengthen the economy rather than wage war. The Burgundian army is modernized according to the French model. This makes the alliance even stronger. As a result, Charles becomes part of a larger project. Burgundy may remain the junior partner, retaining its independence but firmly entering the French sphere of influence. This model makes long-term cooperation between the two states possible. They divide spheres of influence in Germany and Switzerland. Burgundy benefits from trade through French ports. Paris provides protection for its allies from external threats. The alliance becomes the basis of a new political order. This means that the wealthy Netherlands does not fall into the hands of the Habsburgs through marriage, which would upset the entire historical balance of Europe. The Netherlands remains part of the Burgundian system and becomes one of the centers of the common alliance. Huge revenues from trade go not to Vienna or Madrid, but to Dijon and Paris. France gains a powerful economic rear. The Habsburgs are forced to look for other ways to strengthen their power. This makes them weaker players. The story we have examined is not just a fantasy about a surviving heroine. It is an analysis of how a single factor, the survival and rise to power of Joan of Arc, could have acted as a catalyst, accelerating historical processes by decades. In our reality, France moved towards centralization, a standing army, and victory over England slowly and painfully, through intrigue, defeat, and recovery after Joan's death. In our scenario, her survival and assumption of the regency did not change the course of history, but it radically shortened the time frame. She did not bring anything new that was not already present in the era, but she used existing tools, the army, taxes, diplomacy, with unprecedented will and legitimacy. She became the architect who rebuilt France from ruins in a few years, rather than half a century. The consequences of this acceleration are fundamental. The early unification of France and the preservation of the Burgundian alliance would have created a center of power in Europe that would probably have left the Habsburgs no chance of domination. And England, faced with this monolith, would have been forced to seek its destiny in the ocean. One soldier saved at the gates of Compiègne could have changed the balance of power on the planet for 500 years to come. Subscribe so you don't miss out on new versions of history.